Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're doing a deep dive into the documented timeline of one of the absolute most powerful corporate forces on the planet, the fossil fuel industry. We're going to trace the history of Big Oil's internal climate research. We'll look at what they knew, what they actually said publicly, and the massive global impacts of those decisions over the last 50 years. And we're pulling this directly from historical documents and journalistic investigations, so let's get right into it. So the central mystery we want to unravel today really boils down to this. What did the fossil fuel industry actually know about climate change, and exactly when did they know it? To find that answer, we've got to rewind the clock all the way back to the 1970s. This was a time when corporate climate science was just in its pioneering infancy.
Now, to understand just how early this research kicked off, let's look at Ed Garvey. He was a chemical engineer hired by Exxon back in 1978. In 1979, Exxon actually outfitted a massive oil tanker with state-of-the-art equipment just to measure oceanic and atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. I mean, they were collecting continuous data across the entire globe, and they backed it with a huge budget, around $1 million a year. They were doing real foundational science. They were building what Garvey himself called a data monster.
Section 1. The Early Discovery.
Today, researchers can basically distill decades of peer-reviewed science into 10 essential words. It's real, it's us, experts agree, it's bad. There's hope. But here's the wild part. As early as 1977, Exxon's very own top scientists were independently gathering data that pointed directly toward this exact reality. Internal memos were already warning executives that CO2 buildup from burning fossil fuels was warming the planet and posing quite literally catastrophic risks. They saw the writing on the wall, and honestly, they wanted a seat at the policy table.
Section 2. The Pivot to Doubt.
And then, the 1980s hit. Following an oil market downturn, corporate strategy underwent a radical shift. Look at the timeline here. In 1977, that pioneering oceanic CO2 research begins. By 1980, they're actively hiring advanced mathematicians to do in-house climate modeling. But then, fast forward to 1989, the Global Climate Coalition is formed. Now, despite how green that name sounds, this group was actually led by the oil, gas, and auto industries, and its purpose was to stall international climate action. In just over a single decade, the focus completely flipped, from atmospheric research to blocking the exact policies their early scientists said were needed.
So an undeniable contrast starts to emerge. Internally, executives had these crystal-clear warnings from their own PhDs that fossil fuels were warming the planet. But publicly, the PR strategy that really took off in the 1990s was the exact opposite. The goal was to emphasize uncertainty. When you look at the internal documents from that time, they reveal that the strategy wasn't necessarily to argue that the warming was just natural cycles. Instead, the goal was to just hammer away at the uncertainty of the science in the models, basically manufacturing doubt in the minds of the general public.
If that strategy sounds familiar, well, there's a reason for that. Sources directly identify this as the tobacco playbook. Investigations have shown that fossil fuel interests essentially adopted the exact same tactics that big tobacco used to deny the health risks of smoking. By funding what critics describe as a network of fake experts and carefully cherry-picking data, they were incredibly successful at delaying meaningful government regulation for literally decades.
Section 3. The natural gas delay. Moving into the 21st century, over-denial kind of morphed into a new strategy. The industry pivoted to heavily marketing natural gas, pitching it as the clean alternative to coal. And this created a really massive political paradox. Investigative reporter Russell Gold actually calls it the Obama-era contradiction. Think about it. The US government desperately wanted to be a global climate leader, right? Yet, at the exact same time, they were overseeing this unprecedented oil and gas fracking boom. The logic they were operating on was that natural gas could serve as a bridge fuel, just until renewables were fully ready to take over.
But here's the fatal flaw in that bridge fuel argument. It's all in the delivery. Sure, when you measure it right at the burner tip, natural gas does produce less CO2 than coal. But getting it to that burner tip, that involves drilling wells, pushing the gas through miles of gathering lines and compressor stations, and sending it down massive pipelines. And every single step of that process is susceptible to unmonitored leaks of methane. Now, methane is a greenhouse gas that is way more potent in the short term than CO2. Because these leaks largely went unmeasured for so long, those supposed climate benefits were basically drastically offset.
Section 4. The present-day crossroads.
Decades of these strategic delays have culminated in the very intense pressures we're facing right now today.
To really wrap your head around the scale of the ongoing commitment to fossil fuels, just consider this number, $1.38 billion. That is the massive sum ExxonMobil planned to spend in 2022 alone just on operating leases and capital projects in Guyana's Stabroek Block. So even while renewable energy is constantly dominating the headlines, billions upon billions of dollars are still actively flowing right into new deep-sea oil extraction.
As a result, executives today, like Exxon CEO Darren Woods, are caught in an absolute vice of conflicting global demands. On one side, they are facing immense pressure from governments to ramp up production to combat record-high gas prices and geopolitical supply crises. But then, on the flip side, they're facing historic internal pressure. Back in 2021, an activist investor firm called Engine No. 1 staged an unprecedented shareholder rebellion. They actually succeeded in installing new directors on Exxon's board, specifically to push the company toward a much faster energy transition.
And the urgency coming from those investors? It is incredibly fierce. There's a quote from a shareholder featured in a CNBC documentary that really just says it all. These guys need to be punched in the face. What would get you there? I mean, it's a stark illustration of the deep frustration from activists and investors. They fear that despite all the PR pivots and the shiny new climate pledges, big oil is fundamentally still prolonging our societal dependence on fossil fuels and delaying that essential shift towards sustainable energy.
So that leaves us with this final, really profound question. We've seen how the industry went from gathering the very first climate data to manufacturing widespread doubt, leading to what critics often call the lost decades of climate action. With billions still being invested in extraction today and immense, conflicting pressure coming from literally all sides, can we actually transition to a new energy future before time runs out? The science absolutely says there's hope, but the timeline? Well, that is entirely up to the choices being made today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.